Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am super excited. We got Chad returning. We got Nick returning. We got Seb returning. You know, I checked the numbers, Seb. You're almost at 100 episodes.
Awesome.
You're really close. John here, as always. I am stoked. Now, while I am stoked, y'all should be too. Do the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bells, do all that good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, put them up in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show. And we're going to be talking about taking time today. And let's all take the time, first off, and get some intros out of the way. I'm going to start with Nick. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. 10 to 15 seconds. Go.
Yeah, so Nick Iga, originally from Hawaii. I did 10 years in the Army, a lot of that in 2nd Ranger Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. And I'm currently at Harvard studying neuroscience with the hopes to destigmatize utilizing psychedelic therapy as a forms of alternative means of therapy.
Bam. Look at that. I think he was 12 seconds on that one. Nicely done. Chad, how about yourself?
Yeah, Chad McLean, Army veteran, also 2nd Ranger Battalion and Grunt Leg Unit as well. Owner and founder of Mental Joe Apparel that brings non-traditional therapies like Nick is talking about with the psychedelics, like he's diving in. Got to get Nick some shirts so he can support those, but I'm out here in Peoria, Arizona.
Bam. 14 seconds. I like it. Deb, how's Southern Alberta treating you still?
Oh man, it's glorious around these parts nowadays. And I'm just doing all kinds of yard work and building flagpoles and having a blast here. Homestead is the way to go.
I love it. I love it. Just wait until the snow comes.
Whatever, dude. I'm from Quebec, dude.
There you go.
When we missed a day of school, you know, when you looked outside your window, you couldn't see the bus. That's how big the freaking snowbanks were. So I think I'm good.
We didn't get those days off. We just had to walk to school.
Yeah, exactly.
Both ways.
Exactly.
John, how's the mountains treating you?
Yeah, things are good. I was just thinking maybe as Seb's building all those flagpoles, you should add an extra 6 feet to each flagpole because you're gonna be dealing with Alberta snow, buddy, not Quebec snow, Alberta snow.
Yeah, actually we get less snow than in Quebec here.
Yeah, it's true.
It's weird just because of the wind.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
The wind is killer down there, and I have seen many a truck turned over just from the wind, and it is it's crazy. So have fun down there. I'm going to come see you very soon, though. You and I are going hunting, so it's going to be a really good day. Now, let's get into it. We're going to be talking about taking time, and we all kind of take time differently. We all do our own things, and I'm wondering, how do you personally define taking time in your life, that is? And there's a secondary on top of that is, how has your understanding of it changed through time? So I'm going to start with Chad. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, how I look at time now is completely different than I looked at it, 5 years ago. Family, my boys, my wife, everything comes first now. I learned to live in the present, and most recently have taken a massive just kind of pause with Mental Joe. When you talk about taking time, right? Everybody's in their life and their own journeys, but sometimes you feel like you got to put the head down and continue to just grind as hard as you can, and then before you know it, you're wore out, and you lose your purpose, and you lose your focus, and you lose your why. So for me, it was recently just pausing everything from social media to new shirt designs to whatever, to take the time to zoom out, reassess, and find out where else we need to go. So this is a topic that's pretty recent for me, actually. So
yeah, absolutely. When I put the guest list together, I was like, what does all of these people have in common? And you guys have all just come out of something that you've done for yourselves to take time. And I love it. Nick, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, look at time and in a weird in the perspective of Sean's favorite motivational speech promote. He talks about time when you're most of the resources, where you put that time is ultimately where you put attention and your resources. So nowadays, look at it is like
I'm having trouble hearing you, Nick. Hold on one second. We're just getting some audio clippage here. I'm going to come back to you real quick while I work on some of your audio. Okay. Seb, you want to jump in here?
I wonder how many more hours you were going to let him talk like this.
I was playing with it for a second. I was just trying to see if I could fix it. But... oh, you're muted, John. It's going crazy here. But yes, Seb, go ahead.
Yeah. So like just like anybody else on this panel, I assume that, the older you get and the more precious you realize time is, it starts really shifting your perspective. Right now, I wouldn't exchange time for a full bucket of gold at any opportunity. But what I have been known to do is not take enough still time, and stillness is critical. And it's a bit of a dichotomy when you look at, sort of what guys like us consistently do, which is pushing forward or pressing forward. And so we feel like if there's no forward momentum, automatically we must be seeking something, or we must be, starting something so that we may initiate forward momentum. Sometimes stillness is forward momentum. Sometimes you need that, to make the right assessment to where you are in space and time, to contemplate where you are, where you're going, to contemplate if you're still in due course or if you need to be adjusting certain things. And so for me, one of the I will call it a grace that I've been giving myself recently is to take the time to be still, to not move forward necessarily, and to take time to assess where I'm at, and generally speaking. And so, and I do that by, detaching and accepting some of the things that are occurring in my life, mindfulness, balance of action, compassion with myself, and in contemplating where it is that I am and where it is that I'm going, and some of the things that perhaps I didn't achieve just quite yet. And so, and I try to keep the whole thing wrapped in sort of a mental calmness and keep it as simple as I possibly can. And I found it to be extremely therapeutic as far as giving me real answers that normally I would be moving when I try to grasp. And so, anyways, I digress. I took a little bit longer, but for me, and it's really sort of funny because one of my clients 10 years ago, or actually probably 15 years ago now, because I lose track of time, he'd look at me and he's like, I would never test you by giving you something extremely difficult to do. What I would do is to make you face the wall and tell you to do nothing. That would be the biggest challenge of your life. And, there is some truth to that to a certain extent.
I think that's a challenge for a lot of guys, especially driven people of service that want to constantly be working, to doing something. To just stand there and do nothing is a massive challenge. Nick, let's give you another shot here. What do you got?
Yeah. So for me, taking time as a resource, right? It's resource you never get back. So look at taking time in the past was I never had bad choppy.
Nick, I hate to do this to you one more time. Can I get you to try to jump out of the convo and then jump back in? A reset might do you well. Just unfortunately not catching. Right. I'll kick you out and then there he goes. Okay, Sean, how about yourself? How do you define taking time?
Well, what I did do, ironically, and I mean the delicious irony of this, is that coming into this subject of taking time, and I had like almost no time before I jumped into the podcast. So I had no time to research this subject. I could have made time, but I didn't. And so as I was listening to the guests, the universal quote for me anyway popped into my head. So I quickly pulled it up on screen here, and I'm just going to read it out. It's from The Matrix. The quote is from the Merovingian. If you don't know who the Merovingian is, try to imagine a silky smooth French accent as I say this. So the Merovingian, and I quote, "Something to eat, drink. Of course, these things are contrivances, like so much here, for the sake of appearances. Neo, no thank you. Merovingian, yes, of course. Who has time? Who has time? But then if we never take time, how can we have time?" I love that quote, man. If you don't take the time, how can you have time? And if you're not taking time, how can you understand time? So if you don't understand time, how can you respect time? If you've got no respect for time, time just disappears. And that's the way it is. The days feel long, the decades go by in a blink of an eye. I've said that in the past. I've actually written about it in the past. And that's the way I see it from someone who's now, in his 60s. Time is funny, man. Time is for all of us to control, but it feels out of control. And so I find the middle ground of it feeling like it's slipping away without an ability to slow it down versus not valuing it enough to try to slow it down. It's a fascinating confluence of many things that are attached to time. And you can look at time through the lens of your own personal life. You can look at time through the lens of your kids growing up from knee height to hip height to shoulder height. You can view it through the lens of a dying flower. You can view it through so many things. But I'll go back to what the Merovingian states, and it is, but then if we never take time, how can we have time? That's where I'm going to start off.
It's a beautiful piece. I love it. Nick, what do you got?
All right, let's try this one more time. Yeah, so look at time is I framed it when I was younger, as in time was just this thing that passed. I didn't really have to pay attention to it because I felt like I had nothing but time. And so when I look back at it and how I viewed it when I was a younger dude was, I wish I had taken the time to do what everybody else is saying, to be still, to be present, to enjoy those moments. When I was younger on team or when I was doing stuff in the military, it just kind of always slipped by. And looking back at it, I wish I paid attention to what was happening around me. And I wish I could have stayed in those moments a little bit longer. Nowadays, my perspective on time is preparatory work, in the idea that anything that I want to do, I want to be present. I want to ensure I'm doing the best I can. I have to spend that time and take the time to set aside and make sure that I'm ready. For example, like before this podcast, to take the time to meditate, or if I'm setting up my day for the week, I have to take the time to ensure that I know exactly what my goals are and what I want to spend my time on. And the only way that I can know what I actually want to spend my time on and what goals I want to push forward, I have to deliberately set time aside to prepare everything, to make sure that I'm set and have my goals aligned and to know what direction I'm going in.
This I love where everybody's going with all this, and the fact that it really is a choice to take the time. But I think when we're younger, at least I know from my experience, it takes almost something big to happen before you realize your loss of time, or like to realize, man, I need to actually take the time itself. Physically, it becomes in your control. Whereas when you're a kid, I don't think you really see it that way. At least I didn't see it was under my control. And I'm wondering, when did you guys first realize it? What was the impetus to realize, oh man, I need to step this up, and I need to engage directly in taking the time rather than just allowing the time to pass? Seb, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Yeah. Not surprisingly for me, it had everything to do with when I left the organization and when I, for the first time in my life, wasn't institutionalized, so to speak. And I wasn't a victim of the institutionalization. It was the way it was. You needed to be and do the things that you need to do and be to be a part of these units that, are sought after, but there is a sacrifice there, an unspoken one and spoken one. Lots of sacrifices go along with that, with a life of service. For me, it didn't really hit me until I left. And then I was, 2 years into decompression, realizing that the last 2 decades were an absolute blur. Might as well been an episode of Flash as far as I was concerned, because that's pretty much all I remembered, or all I got out of that. And so, post-service, when everything started sort of slowing down and I was less prone to be fighting for my life, is when I really started contemplating what taking time was going to look like in my future.
That's a perfect impetus too. Nick, what are you thinking?
Yeah, man, it wasn't until relatively recent, to be honest. It wasn't until I met my current girlfriend right now. She's the first woman that I realized I want to spend my life with. And, we met I'm 32, she's 31. And it's when I realized that, like, we only, and at best, maybe have 60, and maybe 70 years together. And it's like, this is the woman I want to spend my life with. I want to do everything with her. And time is dwindling. And then once I realized that time is no longer like, it's not on our side of favor, that really made me focus on like, how am I managing my time? Like, what am I doing with my time, and how can I do these things to set us up for success? How can I do these things to maximize the amount of time that I can spend with her, not on the day to day, but also overall in life? You know, like when I was in, and I'm sure for you guys as well, like I didn't have that realization when friends would get killed or anything like that of like, oh man, I wish I had more time with them, this or whatever. Like, yeah, obviously I wish I had more time with them, but it didn't ever set in. Even the idea that I was kind of a young and wild dude, like I've Z'd out both my bank accounts, like complete zeroed, and been in debt and been like, it is what it is. I get paid every month. I'll have more time to make that money up later. But now that I'm in a position where I'm like, hey, I want to set up a life. I want to build a future with her. I want to have children and do all these things. It's like, oh dang, dude, I need to actually take the time to see what that looks like. I need to take the time to manage my finances. I need to take the time to understand what it means to be disciplined around this thing. And I wouldn't know where to go or what to do if I didn't have her in my life to make me realize that, oh, I really want to maximize the amount of time I have with her and the amount of things we can do together.
That is an amazing point. And interestingly enough, I met my wife, or my wife and I got married. I was 31. She was 30. And yesterday was our 10-year reunion. So our 10-year anniversary reunion. Oh my goodness. Chad, what are you thinking?
Reunion. She's going to string you up for that one.
Oh yeah. And we both forgot about it too. So I'm already in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it's being a dad, right? Both my boys are 7 and 6, you know, and living in that present moment. Connor, my oldest, you know, I mean, this dude loves baseball, loves football. And every morning for the bus, him and I are outside playing catch. Every time he's home from school, we're playing catch. And so for me as a father that didn't have a father figure to do that, I now rest in the space of, there's going to be a time, there's going to be a place where these boys are older and they ain't going to say, hey dad, let's go play catch, because they're going to be playing catch with their boys on the field or their other teams. And so time for me now is more important to just take a deep breath again with this whole pause I've done with Mental Joe. It's helped me zoom out. It's helped me reassess things. It's helped me look at the broader goal of, you know, not just focus on one modality, but, you know, just bring an importance of, you know, mental health to our community of like, we've got to talk about this on a daily basis, as opposed to 22 push-ups in 1 month a year that we're going to talk about this stuff. So, stepping back, like I try to do it now, there's almost an alarm that I've set monthly, you know, that kind of pings me and says, hey, have you taken the time? Are you reassessing? Are you slowing down? And I can tell via, you know, spiraling out of control and that kind of stuff of, you know, have I spent time with the boys? Have I spent time with the wife? Have I taken a walk on my own to reassess the situation where I'm at? So more and more as I learn through this and evolving, that, you know, taking that time and pausing it's got to happen on almost a weekly basis, if not daily.
And, you know, interestingly enough, as the better you get at it, I think it doesn't require to be such big things. When you first start taking time for yourself, it's like, I need to go on a 3 or 4 day, I just need to separate. And then it becomes, you know, a day. And then it becomes as little, sometimes 4 or 5 minutes, like Nick was talking about when he had a quick little meditation before the show, and bam, good to go. Sean, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking I got to get a grip on my mute. I'm thinking back to my opening statement where I referenced the Merovingian and the Matrix as a construct. And I think what I've just heard from every single person just now is them moving out of a construct, the construct of their own making or their own choosing, or, you know, the thing that was wrapped around them that either constrained them or controlled them or convinced them or made them into the person that they were at that time. And then bam, they're into a new construct. So they're out of the old one and into a new one. So with Seb leading off as the example, he was in a construct. He stepped out of the construct. And during that time that he stepped out, he had to figure out the new world, the new thing that he was in. And that's the point that I would like to raise is everyone's in their own construct of their own making, of their own choosing. Their own life is their own construct. We design it, we accept it, or we don't accept it. And so for whatever reason a person will choose to step into a new construct, you've got to recognize that that's what's happening. Otherwise, 10 constructs later, you've missed 10 opportunities to have a conversation like this where you realize the importance of time. 10 constructs will disappear in a blink of an eye, or they will last a lifetime. That's up to you, depending on whether you believe that your life is ticking away second by second in the construct of your choice. The moment that you become aware that you're in the construct of your choosing, well, then you get to do what you want to do. But until you realize that, you're just a victim to your own construct.
So then here's a question for you guys based on that is, how do we avoid perhaps the fear or the anxiety thereof that, as you said, Sean, time is running out, right? The ticking clock can very easily become, like the analogy of Captain Hook, right? The alligator with the clock. It's constantly chasing you. How do you avoid falling into that trap and start utilizing the time rather than running from it? Nick, I'm going to come to you first. What do you got?
Yeah, before you had said utilizing or running away from that construct, my immediate thought was to challenge it. I think I used to have a poster on my board called Life in Weeks, and it had all the weeks that generally someone lives within 80-year life, and every week you tick it off. And I think dealing with that idea that you are going to die no matter what, like mortality is guaranteed and you will die, I think it's a good thing. It helps you, or at least it helped me, put things in perspective of what I want to do and what I want to lead into with the time that I've left. Looking at it now, I still see it as positive, the idea that like this mortality, this thing is going to be looming over us no matter what, but it puts more value for me into the things that I want to focus on more. It puts more value in the idea that, like right now, I'm at school, right? I don't have a social life. I don't really do anything. And I made that decision because I wanted to invest more time in my own personal health, more time in sharpening my own mind, and I want to put more time into my relationship. And I don't think I would have been able to do that if it wasn't for the idea or wasn't for that pressure of knowing that like this is going to end at some point. It's weird. I look at my father now, and he's about to hit 70, and he's starting to look like how I remember my grandfather looking at my earliest memories. And I'm starting to put these parallels I can overlay together. Like, holy cow, my dad looks like my grandpa, and I remember my grandpa dying. I remember like watching him die. And so now it's like, okay, I want to spend more time with my family. I want to make these relationships stronger. And I think having that almost overbearing pressure, not to the point where it consumes me, but that reality that this thing is going to end and it will be taking forever. I think it's a positive, and I think it's been at least a positive in my life and helped me reframe my perspective around these.
I love that. Chad, what do you got?
I always bring it back to my boys, just realizing, right? You said earlier from, growing up from the kids from your hips to your shoulders and above, right? As they grow, we kind of lean on that. And I really lean on that, knowing where my boys are at and where they're growing, and knowing that opportune time that I have with them is really small, right? I mean, I really have the time up until about they're 13. And then they kind of, their peers kind of take over. And then, they're out in the middle of the world doing their own thing. And I might get a call once a month, So for me, understanding that is not going to last forever, and knowing that window is just squeezing in on me with them being 7 and 6, it's like, damn, I've really got 7 years to really hone this in and build a strong foundation to when they're, 18 and 20, they're no, I want to go hang out with dad because dad's cool, So it's very imperative for me now, just seeing them grow up and knowing how that timeline is just gradually shrinking more each day.
That is a hard realization. Every time I see my boys walk past the growth chart that we have for them, they're just slightly above the previous line. And I'm like, man, that was like 2 weeks ago. Seb, you got any thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more that without darkness, there wouldn't be light. And, everything, as if we were to give you endless amount of time to do whatever you wanted, you'd spend most of your time doing absolutely nothing. And next thing you know, you'd have 100 years passed, and you'd still be sitting there eating Cheetos and playing Call of Duty. But for me, I think gratitude is a big piece of that, because really, when we're being objective about this, there are people out there that live to be 100, and there's also a bunch of people that live to be 7. And for me, when I try to gain a little bit of perspective on what I'm doing with my time or where I'm at in my life, it brings me gratitude to think that, hey man, I never thought I was going to be here, 2 decades ago, let alone 3 decades ago. And now I am. And the reality is I'm grateful to be here, to have this opportunity, to still have time to do certain things. And we don't know how serious I can get about those certain things because we don't know how much time we have. But one of the things that I also really like to focus on is not see time as this grim reaper that's following me. It's not the end of life. It's part of life. But what I do not want is to waste it. I want to make sure that I can optimize the time usage, whether it's with family and what's interesting with that is the first thing you think about is I need to be spending more hours. And it's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily that you need to be spending more hours doing certain things. Sometimes it's just that you need to be more engaged while you are doing it. Because I've historically, spent time with people and I've had experiences that were extremely sort of incredible experiences, but then I would live them after. At the time there was like nothing. It was like almost like an emotional numbness. And then, a week or two later, I'd be like, man, that was so much fun. And it's like, well, that was 2 weeks ago when you were engaged in that process. Now that was the time to really set your bearing so that you were, in line with what it is that was occurring. Because next thing you know, you don't have a week, you don't have 2 weeks later, and sometimes it may not be that something happens to you. Sometimes maybe something happens to the person you're with, or maybe by way of circumstances, life gets in the way, whatever the case is. And so never taking those for granted. The fact that, a lot of people don't get to see the age that we're at, whatever age we're at. And a lot of people won't get to see tomorrow. What can I do today in honor of those that are 7 fighting at children's,
Yeah, that's such a good point. Gratitude is, I think it's such a requirement in everybody's life. Sean, you got thoughts on this?
I do. So based on what Seb just said, something popped into my head. I've never really considered it before. And it's kind of like a double productivity exercise or double production. And so we're talking about how to use our time wisely. And that's for us to decide what wisely means. But here's the rub. You've got to know that that's what you're doing. You're using your time. So let me paint 2 examples. You're sitting in your chair in the morning, you got your coffee brewing, sun's coming in over your left shoulder, you've got a book in your hand, you're enjoying the moment. But an hour later, the hour has disappeared. Maybe you haven't even read a page, but you've been comfortable, the sun's been nice, you started thinking about something on a page, and then you got lost in your thoughts, time disappeared, you've finished your coffee. It was a nice morning, but were you productive? Well, you're productive if your intention was to disappear into the moment and go offline so much, or decompress so much, or defrag so much that you're actually not really present even with yourself. You just drop into such a state of decompression that time disappears and you're not productive. But you're productive if that was your intention. You're unproductive if time just disappeared and it was like, well, okay, well, I guess there goes that. Is that what I wanted? Yeah, that's what I wanted. Well, that's called luck, not planning. That's called luck, not running your life the way that you want to run your life. That's just letting it happen. So you get to choose whether you want to be productive with your time or unproductive with your time. And productive, sometimes in modern society, is given a negative connotation, like, bro, you're working too hard. You're putting out too much production. Well, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with being productive? But the production rate is up to you to control. But you do have to have some productiveness in you. Otherwise, a life goes by and you haven't created anything. And that doesn't mean that you've got to create a masterpiece that gets hung in the Louvre. It doesn't mean that you've got to become a baseball Hall of Famer. It doesn't mean anything to anyone else other than you. You get to decide what you get to do with this life. And you'll be bummed if you ain't productive. So again, it's for all of us to decide what production means to us in the moment. And production can be as simple as, for the next hour, I'm not going to do anything except enjoy the comfort of this leather chair and the sunshine on the side of my face. If that's intentional, then that's productive. If an hour disappeared, that's unproductive. So it's for you to know what's up. Now, to Seb's point, the double productiveness strategy. You've got to be productive in the moment, the people that you're hanging out with, the thing that's happening, the thing that you can learn from, get better at in the real time. That's the production moment. The double production is when you start thinking about it after the fact, a week or two later. That's when you get to do the double dive on the double production. And so you want to live one life or two lives or no life. These are all choices that we get to make.
This brings up a really interesting thought in my head, is the fact that production is key. And I think at a young age, perhaps, maybe I'm just talking from my own personal experience here, that production was always for others. And it wasn't until I realized that I had to produce for myself that I started taking the time in order to do that, to take time or to prioritize time on the mats, for instance. Jiu-jitsu becomes one of those things that I need for myself to take the time to do. And I'm wondering, did you guys go through something similar in that? And that, the realization that either you're producing for others or you weren't producing for yourself? Seb, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
It's like you read my mind or something. Yes, the is the answer. I did spend a great deal of time doing things for the collective and doing things for the organization I worked with, doing things for my peers, the guys I was on the teams with, and others. But I wasn't, necessarily taking hardly any time for myself, and that includes as a hard reset. That includes to reboot, or to even assess where I'm at, all of those things. And so I didn't do much of that at all. And ultimately, it's your time that's taken away, as you are investing it in others, which is obviously a righteous pursuit. But I think that had I done it differently, in the sense that had I prioritized things in the right order, especially in the beginning of my career, especially mid-career, when a lot of us have second marriages, and some of us have third and fourth. At some point, there and that includes the relationship with the kids, and who gets to parent them, and who gets to spend time with them, and all of those things. And I've literally messed up all of that. I really did. And even when I was home, I was so engaged everywhere else and not in the moment, that I would, be on my phone answering texts from the boys, or doing whatever it was that I felt was important at the time. But at the end of the day, no matter how I cut it, no matter how I sugarcoat it, that was a demise of my personal life at the time, and including, a very, very important relationship with my girls, which, is to this day needing to be worked on. So I could stand here and tell you that I've used my time effectively, that I was a picture perfect sort of spouse and father, but it just simply wasn't the case. And so, and now what you're doing further down the line is you're trying to now make for lost time. And that is a very, very treacherous pursuit. It's very difficult to do. For one, the subconscious mind doesn't have a concept of time. So a lot of the hurt that is caused when you're not doing it properly is very difficult to bridge that gap later, even though you may have the physical time to do it, is whether or not you're going to have buy-in in that process. And that's something that I would really caution against.
Thank you for sharing that. Love that. Chad, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, as most of you guys know, a lot of this new change, or new butterfly, if you want to call Chad 2.0, has really been recent, in these last 4.5 years. And prior to that, I didn't really take time for myself. I was in corporate real estate for 20 years. I was always a top performer. But on the other side of it, I was popping pills, and I was drinking. I was close to 300 pounds, and I didn't take care of myself. And I was a venomous douche. And now just kind of be on this other side, and again, I say, thankfully, to psychedelics, I've learned to slow down. And, like Seb, he's got regrets there, hearing that in the tone of being a father and wanting to be more present there. And I can listen to that and I feel that. And I feel the hurt and anguish of that. But where I'm at, like now with my boys, is I can be that father. So I might have missed out on a lot of the really cool pipe hitter stuff, that, shoulda, coulda, woulda. But the fact that now I can realize, like, okay, I missed out on that, but I am now present to be the best father possibly for my sons, to give them a foundation, be better men as they get into this world. So I have a lot of regret on the last 20 years of my life, not, meeting the expectations, or like I said, I know the standard, I just didn't put in the reps. And so now going forward, I've got to let that go. And I've got to realize, hey, I can put in the reps now, but I've got to time block that out. And I've got to be realistic on my approaches and my goal and what I want to meet. So.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we all need to really consider very deeply, whether or not we are actively seeking what we want rather than just what's in front of us. It's a beautiful point. Nick, what do you got?
Yeah, hit on what Sean and the questions. We have a lot of choice.
I hate to do this to you. You're getting all choppy again. I'm going to get you to jump out, then jump back in again, and I'll come back to you in a second. No worries. John, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that a word was said, and it's not that I dislike the word. I just want to change the word a little bit, not clean it up even, just offer up another word so that we can think about this subject a little bit differently. So the idea of slowing down to do life better. I'd like to change the word slow down, and I'd replace it with cleaner signal. So none of us have to slow down. In fact, most of us have to frickin' pick up the pace. The problem is, how clean is your signal? So if you've got a lot on the go, as Chad said, he was busy 20 years doing this, doing that, selling houses, being magnificent. That's all good. But you can do all of that and feel like you're doing it at a very comfortable pace. Or if you've got too much going on, and by too much, I mean usually that's extraneous or unnecessary dirty signals, dirty noise, static that has got no bearing on your life, the life that you want to live. The static creeps in, you let it creep in. Now it's not serving you well, but now it's become part of your life. Now you want to slow down because you've got so much on the go. You've got so much noise that you're contending with. If someone was a sound technician, they would strip out all of that dirty static. They'd pull out all of the unnecessary noise. You'd get a nice, clean signal, and life would unfold a little more purely from a audio perspective. But again, we all let the creep in. And we take on this and we take on that, and we want to do this and we want to do more, and we want to be more productive. But the best production a person can do is giving it your all in the moment in a clear signal way. And that requires knowing what you want to do in life, knowing what you want to create in life, knowing who you are in the moment in life. And most of us, if not all of us, don't really know that all the time. And so time is best lived when you're taking the time to understand your life. But we defocus on that, and what we do tend to focus on is accumulating more rather than creating more. And so we bring on more and more and more things into our life that we hope and feel and want to fill in the gaps, but all they do is create extraneous noise.
I love the visual of static. I think that's such a great way to look at it in terms of just the things that we enter our lives slowly, or even concept of mission creep, right? Of having an idea and then slowly that just shifts off into nothingness. Nick, what are you thinking?
Yeah, to kind of hit what you guys were saying, I think a lot of it is a choice to where we get to invest our time and what we invest our time into. I mean, in my life personally, as we're getting ready to leave college and get on to finally getting a real adult job again, I look at it as where do I want to invest the next 5 to 10 years of my life as far as career goes, and I have to really think about the idea of like, am I happy with what that time will go into? So, for example, on the States here, a lot of kids from school are looking to get into consulting or something in investment banking or on the business side of the house. And you're working for big companies like BCG, Bain, McKinsey, things like that. And when I took the macro approach of trying to overview what's going on, I realized I didn't want to spend 100 hours a week working for a giant corporation that doesn't really care about me, nor do I believe in their mission. And obviously, all of us here have done things where we're putting in 100 hours a week into something that we cared about and could throw ourselves into. But I had to make that choice. It's like, do I want to spend my time leaving school, investing my time into an entrepreneur pursuit, into working for a corporation that I don't really believe in? And ultimately, where I ended up taking a job in private equity for my buddy's father's firm. But I truly believe in the companies they're investing into and what they're trying to do through the firm in itself. And I think they're ultimately going to try and put good back into the world. And if I think I'm going to have to put 100 hours of work a week into something, I'd rather it be into the thing that I care about and something that I can really get behind. So I think a lot of it is having to make that choice, of that very deliberate choice of like, okay, this is what I'm going to invest the next 100-hour week to 5 to 10 years of my life into. And is it building towards the thing that I see myself? And trying to, like you guys were saying, remove that static. But even to remove the static, you have to take the time to go about doing that, right? You have to take the time to meditate, to journal, maybe utilize psychedelic therapy, what have you. And you have to go about deliberately removing said static and deliberately setting up those timepieces and reviewing like, hey, this is the thing I'm not going to get back, and what do I want to do with it while I can?
You guys are making such great points, and I'm just loving this. And I'm wondering,
Sorry, if I could
what do you
just
got, Sean?
real
Yeah.
quick, based on what Nick said, because it's really powerful, and I want to simplify it down maybe a touch more for anyone who's listening who didn't fully pick up what he just stated. I think in life, you should consider everything as a simple equation or a simple puzzle to solve. What we all do is we overcomplicate it. So in Nick's case, he could have looked at all of his peers, could have looked at all of his options, and he could still be sitting in his room right now trying to make a good decision based on too many options and not enough thought. So sometimes it's as simple as this: sit down, decide if it feels good or bad. If it feels good inside, and I'm not talking like good for your bank account, I'm not talking about good for your receding hairline, I'm talking about good for your soul. If it feels good, now it stays on the list. If it don't feel good, it's struck off the list. As simple as that. But you can't do this exercise with just one in front of you. You can't think, okay, there's this banking opportunity, good or bad? Bad. Now what? Run two things up against each other. Have two in front of you, good or bad. Choose one that feels better versus worse. Now you're in the game of making comparative decisions. Now you are considering not just a thing, you're considering all things, but just through 2 points. The more that you can compare and contrast good and bad, good and evil, you'll find that your life shapes itself up pretty simply. We lose it as humans when we overcomplicate it. We put 100 things in front of our nose, we turn it into a complex problem, and we never even think of the words good and evil. They're replaced by awesome bank account, Ferrari, porch umbrella, whatever the case is. But it really is a simple equation. Good and evil have two things to compare.
The simplicity of it is fantastic. And to your point, I remember seeing a meme online at one point in time that was like, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy a jet ski. And have you ever seen an unhappy person on a jet ski? I was like thinking to myself, no, but that's just that's in that 1 second, because then you got to load it up. You got to take it home. You got to pay for gas. You got to do all the things. Like, it's not just that one particular thing. So I love that it's a simple equation, but but you're eliminating all like the rest of the happenstance that happens afterwards. And I'm wondering the level of introspection that's required to be able to determine whether or not something is good or bad for you. It's a learned skill, right? And it's something that you have to do a bunch of times, and you got to test your gut, and you got to feel how it works. And you may think this is good for you, and then do it, and it not turn out well. So I think it requires some testing involved in there as well. But how has taking that time, that introspection, how has that influenced your decision making? How has that changed how you make calls in your life? Nick, I'm going to start with you. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, to hit what you said, pretty much hit on the head, was by taking that time to have the introspection, look at the things and how it influences the decisions I make. It's you look for that internal friction, right? Like as I'm getting ready to leave college again at the next stage of life, the option for an MBA was on the table, and that ultimately seems like a good decision, right? Like for me to be a mid-career, more or less MBA because of my previous military experience. But it's a free school. I get paid $80,000 a year, and like I'd have 2 more years of kind of doing whatever I want. But as I was getting ready to start studying for the testing required to get an MBA school, I had to really take the time to sit and see what that was. And I just kept feeling this internal friction, this thing of like, man, I don't even want to sit down and begin looking at like shopping programs to use to study for this thing. And I just realized like this is a terrible feeling. And I just used that internal friction guide to look at all the other options in front of me. And just through that, I've been able to kind of steer where I want to go with my life. I mean, even the idea of like the mountains that I was climbing while I'm here at school, did I want to do internships to build towards my future? Or do I want to use the time that I had here at college, the 4 years, to pursue something that really lit me on fire? And as I thought about it, it was an easy decision. It's like, I want to do something that lit my soul on fire. And I pushed towards that. And I was like, well, if this leads me towards not having a career opportunity, I'll just deal with that later. Because right now, like in this moment, these are the things that make me happy. And I'd rather be happy and be okay with the things I did with that time versus pursuing whatever I have to, or whatever I felt was the pressures of it, right? There's that old quote, never let the dogma of others influence your decisions. And through pursuing what I thought I had to do versus what I wanted to do, I ultimately would not be as happy as I am now and extremely less fulfilled.
I love the idea of having your soul on fire. Seb, what are you thinking?
I probably will have my soul on fire. I don't know if it'll be a good thing, but so one of the things that I really like that Sean was talking about, Hicks laws, right? Like you have too many options, it causes a critical stall. It has the potential to. But one of the things that I have to think about when I think about the words that I speak to myself in relation to my introspection. So I'm doing an introspection and I come up with certain things, certain concepts, certain parameters, certain purposes, whatever you want to call them. When it comes to human beings, like we are not very good with words at all. And I don't care if we're very good at articulating things. Our vocabulary and our conversations that we have with ourselves lack depth often. It very much does. If I was to try to ask you to describe love to me, I can let you, squirm there for 45 minutes and you still wouldn't capture and skim the very top of what it actually is, and it needs to be felt, is what I'm getting at, right? And so when Sean says, sometimes you need to get out of your head and into your feelings, I mean, especially for those of us that have maybe a little bit more sort of stoic approach to problem solving things, occasionally we need to know when it's time to do the other way around. And if you don't have that, you don't have balance. And without balance, you're out of balance. Right. And so another analogy that I really like with this process, and again, to what Sean was speaking about, which was then I think supported by Nick there, for me, when I introspect on what it is where is it that I'm going and how fast am I going, or how fast am I going to it, I have to look at a variety of different things. First of all, can I clean up what I've been doing? Is some of what I've been doing needing to be cleaned up? And then, is my velocity creating stalls? And I'll extrapolate just ever so slightly on this. Imagine, if you know anything about super sports motorcycle, I can give you 1,000cc motorcycle to go on a track, but you're likely that you're going to be so hard on the brake and the gas that you're going to be slower than the person that has a 600. and is going slower, but has consistency and flow and everything, right? And so the fact that you're investing and you're sort of, bollocks to the walls at all times doesn't make it that it's the right strategy for you in the moment. So I need to make sure that my velocity and my movement forward doesn't create critical stalls later down the line on account of I'm going way too fast and I don't know where I'm going. One of my favorite line in any movie really was Women King, when the young, the young lady comes in and she wants to be this crazy warriors and she's full of potential and everything, and one of the girls looks at her, it's like, you have no idea where you're going and you're sprinting everywhere. Like, this is not how this works. Have a destination and then start running, kind of thing. And then finally, I have to look at the things that I might, about myself and about my way of doing things, that I might be pathologically attached to. That's an important piece. Some of those things might have to be discarded altogether. And so, taking the time to clean up on a technical standpoint might be the reason why you're winning the race with a bike that doesn't go nearly as fast.
This is, it reminds me of back in the day, early 2000s, I used to play a game called Gran Turismo. Some of you guys might not know which one that is. Sean probably doesn't. But it's a racing simulator, and one of the cars that you would get at the end of doing a lot of the races was the Dodge Viper. Super powerful, couldn't control for anything, and it turned out to be like, yeah, I got this car, and then it just didn't get driven because of the fact that it was just too unwieldy. Couldn't manage it at all. That's a fantastic point, Seb. Chad, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, now that I'm a lot more introspective, the brain's a lot busier on deciding on, what I'm going to do and what is that. Maybe it's not the right terminology, what that ROI looks like with said time, right? I've got a lot of buddies that they're still out there, they're still drinking, they're doing golf, they're going to their strip clubs, they're doing all that. Yeah, I could do that, but how is that going to push me forward and make me a better human being? And so I look at things like that, and I will beat myself up internally now, but give that spreadsheet in the head of, because of X, what are the outcomes? Or if I act in a certain way, what is that outcome going to look like for somebody else that's looking on the outside looking in? So again, constantly, I'm always, reevaluating things. Like I said, most recently was the biggest pause for Mental Joe. And, will we lose followers if we don't post? No, we didn't lose followers. Will we gain more if we do this? No. So instead of just throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks, it's pausing. And again, I use a terminology of just zooming out and slowing down so I can be better. So it's a constantly, how do I adjust to be better moving forward internally?
Looking inwards, but also up and out at the same time. I love it. Sean, what do you got?
I was thinking about what you mentioned about someone on their jet ski. They're super happy. All the water's flying over their head and, they're looking magnificent. But some of the most unhappiest people I know have 4 jet skis sitting in their front yard. And so what do you do when you want to go to the lake and get your jet ski on? Do you have all 4 of them in a row as you're towing them behind your latest, greatest new truck? How does it work? And so do you line up 3 along the beach? You get out on your very, very favoritist and looking magnificent. And then when you're kind of tired of that, you move to your second favoritist. You're out there looking less magnificent, but still feeling happy. How does it work? I know how it works. I've seen it many a time. It doesn't work. Trying to buy happiness is a fool's paradise. You got to earn your happiness. You can't buy your happiness. And if the proxy of you've earned your happiness means you've now got enough money in your bank account to buy a jet ski, you've missed the point. Anything that you want or any luxury that you own, those are bolt-ons to the journey that should have had it appear anyway. A good life, a well-lived life, an intentional life, a thoughtful life, a happy life, happiness just kind of gets bolted on as you're living your happy life. Misery is trying to buy happiness, bolting on that bauble to pretend that you're happy. That's misery. And so I'd rather own nothing and let happiness organically unfold decade after decade at an extremely slow pace, rather than rush to the false construct of, I know what happiness is and I'm going to buy my way to it. They're two completely different approaches. And so some of the happiest people I've seen in third world countries own next to nothing. And they're happy to a degree where it's happier than an entire North American continent sometimes. And so we all have to figure out our relationship with commerce. We all have to figure out relationships with our neighbors. We've all got to figure out our relationship with ourselves. And there are so many ways to lose track or get off the path or become confused about what's important in life. Sitting in your chair for the morning, taking some time to reflect on what's important to you now is a good start. But never ever fall into the trapping of the jet ski is going to do it for me.
But what if I had 5 jet skis? Then I'll be happy with 5. No, but you bring up a really great point, and I think a lot of people will buy fun, but they don't know, because they don't know what happiness really is. They just know what fun is. And I'm wondering, because I want to go back to a thing you touched on, Sean, a little while ago, was taking time to, like, the difference between stepping back or slowing down versus cleaning the signal. And I want to know what you guys have in terms of strategies or tips or tricks or things like that you've done to help other people with that, to realize the importance of it and how to avoid just smashing your head through walls until you're unconscious. What tips would you have for anybody else? Nick, I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
Yeah, how I go about that is I try and peer pressure my friends into doing extremely hard things. It's when I was listening to Sean talk about having the jet skis and all those things, and really understanding like what you need, and not all these things are bolted on to the journey. It's like whenever I do like an ultra marathon or a really hard ruck or whatever physical challenge I try and take on to do the thing, in the moments of like extreme friction where I'm really hurting, I'm never thinking like, man, I really want this super cool thing. I'm normally thinking like, man, I want to like, I wish my feet didn't hurt. I want a warm shower. I want a good meal. It helps clear out the clutter to what you really need and what's really necessary. And like the idea of one of the first ultra marathons I ever ran, like I've never done a sanctioned one. I just had my buddy drop me off at the Space Needle in Seattle. I just ran 32 miles back to the Tacoma Dome, and I was like, well, see what happens. And when I was running that thing, like my watch died, my phone died. I also didn't really train for it either. I think before that I was running like 8 miles or something like that. But in the middle of it all, like the sun was setting, I was in an incredible amount of pain, and I had this like epiphany. And what it came to me was like, savor these moments of pain, savor the anguish, because one day I'm going to be so old that I'm going to be sitting on my porch and I would give anything to feel this pain in my legs again, to feel how bad my shoulders hurt. Like I was in so much pain, my teeth were hurting, and it's, I didn't enjoy it, and I wouldn't consider it fun. But in that moment, when I was thinking about the future, all I could think was, one day I would give anything to be able to run again, to feel this sensation again. And so what I tell my friends is like, go challenge yourself, go do something extremely hard, and that will force a static way and focus on the things you really enjoy and really want in life, or out of that moment. And for me, what that made me realize through that experience is health. Like, I want to prolong my health as long as that I can, so that I can feel these things, I can go through these sensations, and that when the day comes that I can't do these things anymore, and I can't push my body as hard as I want to push it, like I'll be okay with what I did with the time that I had to do those things. I never want to be 80 years old and be like, man, I really think I could have ran 100 miles. I'd rather find out and go do that and go through the pain and anguish of those things. And I think through doing that process, it's like a purification of the mind. It lets you realize what is really valuable to you. Because in that moment, not a lot. You're not going to want a lot. You're only going to want a handful of things. And that's what I peer pressure my friends into doing hard things.
I love it. That's the way you use peer pressure. And knowing you, Nick, you're probably going to be the fittest 80-year-old I'll ever. I just love it. Seb, what are you thinking?
Well, he does have the Asian genes. So, for me, I kind of see, again, I'm going to bring gratitude back in there, and I don't want to be the guy that plays a broken record, but I extrapolate just ever so slightly on that. Pain is a luxury that's only afforded to the living. Is that simple? And so when you're capable of, when either adversity hits or you are self-imposing it in some sort of hard endeavor that you want to overcome, either way, it's a luxury that you have to be feeling pain at the moment. And I think that most of us that have been through enough pain understand that. And it reminds us that we're alive and where our priorities lie. I really like that. For me, and again, everybody has different terms and things. I try not to put the word happiness in my vocabulary. Really, I don't use that. I use meaning. Is something meaningful or it isn't? Because some things that makes you extremely unhappy can have great meaning. And if you're capable of finding the meaning in that something, now you're onto something. Whereas if you lose a kid, if anything catastrophic happens, how are you happy? Like how is that going to work? This is a mission failure. If that's a mission you set for yourself and that's your standard of living, you're going to fail for some time. It's not to say you'll never get back there. But the point is, regardless of what happens in life, meaning will always be there. And you can always, kind of override the things that are creating adversity or creating friction, so to speak. Now, as far as having a strategy, I would say this in simple terms: life is about balance. And if even if you're obsessive, there's a cost to this. Yes, you may have a state of temporary obsession because you want to achieve something, you want to do something that's greater than yourself. Maybe it's a sacrifice, but that's precisely why it's a sacrifice, because you will not have much balance during the time that you're obsessive over something that you really want to achieve. As long as you understand that at some point balance needs to be brought back into the equation so it doesn't run away on you. And so for me, one of the things that I will do is, say, for example, if say I got a jet ski, or I just bought something and it brings me an incredible amount of joy in the moment, I'm going to deconstruct it immediately. I will call myself out on that. I will not let myself fly into the wind in the sunset thinking, man, I got a jet ski. This is the best my life's ever been. Instead, I'm going to bring a perspective back. Talk about, health and how many things people that have health want, and how many things that people that don't have it want. They want one thing, which is health, right? Which is something that we often take for granted. And so when it comes to strategies, nothing is foolproof if you don't consistently applying against your reality. I have to call myself out all the time. There is no time where it's over. And I don't need to call myself out now, because I got this figured out. It's like, no, I'm going to catch myself, because the body and mind will trick you into thinking that whatever joy you're experiencing on an instant gratification moment is worth everything that that you love or like or that you want. And that's a lie. That's simply a lie. And so keeping ourselves in check, keeping everything in balance, if at all possible, even if it means a state of temporary obsession, until you can reinstate balance.
That lie is interesting too, because I think that's the basis of addiction right there, is that whatever that feeling is more important than everything else. And I did get a picture of you on a jet ski with your beard hair flowing in the wind as well. So joy right there. Chad, what are you thinking?
I mean, there's all kinds of strategies and thought processes, and I think it all boils down to that person, where they're at currently in that space and in that headspace. Can they put said strategies in place to move that ball forward? And for me, I kind of use social media, right, to kind of check in on people, and see what they're doing and seeing how they're driving. And I might have a day where I'm boo-hooing to myself because I'm just killing myself, and something creeps in the back of the head of, what would Seb do, right? Or, what would Nick do, or what would Chance do, or what would, continue that, right? And I'm like, well, if I'm going to hang out with these dudes, I got to continue to push that envelope, and I got to keep breaking those glass ceilings. So I think it all comes back down to, like, you have to be in that right headspace in order to put said strategies into place. Because if you're not there, you can talk strategies all day long. But if you're not mentally ready to take it on, like, you're just going to keep repeating that same thing. I was the guy with the cool truck and the cool rims and the skidoo and, you know, the boats and the whole 9 yards. And I partied like an animal, but I was not happy, you know. And if someone came to me and said, hey man, if you got rid of all this stuff, you'd be in a better place. I'd be, yeah, whatever, dude, I'm gonna go get another boat next week, you know? So you've got to be in, I think, that frame of mind to make the true changes and put strategies in place to be a better person, so you don't avoid that, so you can avoid that burnout and pause.
I love that. Sean, what are you thinking?
Well, as Chad said, I mean, you do have to kind of do that. You do have to change your ways if your way is wrong. But how do you know your way is wrong? And so if all your friends are doing same, if everyone's lining up all their jet skis on the front lawn and doing cruise bys in the new trucks with the little spinner hubs or whatever, it feels normal. It feels cool. It feels like I need another jet ski, because that's who you're hanging with. Your clan is clan jet ski. And so find a different clan. And I know that's hard. And I'm not talking to anyone in particular right now. I'm just talking to all of us, to everyone, anyone who listens. And finding a new clan shouldn't even require you to feel like you're in the wrong clan. There's no harm in going out and seeing what another clan is about, seeing if it makes sense to you, seeing if you don't like it. To get context, you've got to try something different. To understand the coffee you like, you've got to try lots of different coffees. And that is the way it is. But humans will be satisfied with dropping into a clan at the age of 18 and never leaving it, not understanding what other clans actually are about, whether it's cool or not. You can't understand what's cool if your only vision of cool is the thing you've been since you were the high school football captain. And so we have to move around and test the waters of the world to see what we want to drink. So the jet ski problem is a problem of our own making, simply because whether we fear stepping into a new clan or whether we're unaware of a new clan, I suppose is neither here nor there. The fact remains that to get some context, you've got to go check out something different.
This conversation has been mind-blowing for me, and I'm loving every minute of this. I'm wondering, I have this question here, and it may be a little off topic in terms of what we're talking about right now, but I think it'll play in later on here. But how do you determine when it's right? When either you take time or you push through? Because there's lots of times where, you know, we want to do something, and it's going to require that sacrifice that Seb was talking about earlier, and it's going to require that that sacrifice that you're talking about, Sean, too, of like stepping out of your core group of people. You're gonna have to step away from your tribe. You're gonna have to learn something new. You're gonna have to look the fool. How do we figure out what the timing of that? How do we figure when that's right for us to either rein back and go, okay, I need a 50,000 foot view on this, or I need to put my head down and keep freaking working? What do you guys think? Nick, I'm gonna hit you first. What do you got?
Yeah, I think it's knowing where you want to go, right? Like when we're on mission and something pops off that we don't expect, the first thing to do is take that tactical pause. And if we don't know what our desired end state is or what our objective is, then we can get sucked down these rabbit holes. I'm sure we've all been on missions where we start taking contact from a compound or from an area that we weren't expecting to go into. And, the second you start taking contact there, you have to deal with it, put that fire out. But then you have to take that tactical pause and be like, all right, does this feed into our main objective? Does this feed into the thing that we're supposed to accomplish right now? And if it doesn't, then we got to push on. You know what I mean? And I think when those things pop up in life, it's, if it's urgent, you deal with it, you crush it, you put the fire out, but then you have to take that second, that tactical pause and be like, does pursuing this thing or investing more time into this thing actually feed into the greater objective on which I'm trying to do right now in my life, or the things I'm trying to set up for myself, right? For example, like, again, not to always circle back to this, but it was like internships for me. Like, does taking the opportunity to pursue an internship during my summers, does that feed into the greater objective of what I want to do with my life? And it didn't, right? Because for me, one of the big objectives or the two big things I say for my life is I want to do rad things with my friends and I want to help a lot of people. And doing an internship at some company that I really don't care about, I know doesn't care about me, doesn't feed into either of those things. And even some of these things were paying $10,000 a month for a summer, right? And it's like, that would have been awesome, but that doesn't feed into what I want out of my life or where I'm trying to go with my life. But I have to take that tactical pause and remove myself from the situation and see if this aligns or not.
That's a wonderful point. Seb, I almost forgot your name there for a second. What are your thoughts on this?
You'll remember on episode 101. So if I look at this, for me, it's, do I push through or do I take time off? And I think really there's semantics here, because you can take time off, as we already alluded to, and still be pushing through it, maybe more effectively, because you actually take the time to know where you're going and where you're setting your bearings. So, I think that obviously this is just, semantics, and it's not necessarily uber relevant, but I think it's important to know. So the first things first is to know that sometimes pushing through is the strategy, and sometimes taking a step back is the strategy. So if you already know this, well, you have a few options more than the person that thinks that it's, forward all of the time. And then the question for me is two things. What are my priorities of task here? And have I inverted them? If the goal here is to have functional house that I can live in with my family and everybody's safe, has running water and all the necessities, how did I end up with, I'm looking at getting a barn build and all this stuff? Like, I essentially got treated by a chihuahua here. I somehow started diverting from the end goal, and you may or may not realize that it's happening until your bank account gets hit. But what I like to do is I like to prioritize. So priority a task. Do I still have them in the correct order? And two, what is needed for me to satisfy the end goal, or to at least contribute to the end goal? And if it's technical skills that you need, pushing through as much as you want is not necessarily going to be that efficient at all, because you're lacking knowledge, for example. And I'm using technical skills, but it could be anything. Inversely, if I have my priorities in the wrong order, but I do have what I need in order to continue moving forward, provided that reassert my priorities, then we're good. Then we're pushing through. So it really depends. I again, feeding back into that woman king again, like, you don't know where you're going and you're going as fast as you can. That is not a strategy. It simply isn't, right? And we've all seen the videos of a car full of cops going by the robbers, flying in the other direction because they weren't looking anywhere else. They were going to bank, So they never expected to meet a midway, but really, that's exactly what happened. And anyways, I just think, and again, it's difficult if you're in a time in your life, or if your circumstances are such that you don't even know that, you don't even know that there is two options, that there are additional things that you can do, you may not be ready for the answer that's coming to you. So, I mean, we all know that at some point something will push you into having to conduct an introspection and establish what it is that's going on. And perhaps having read or listened to something like this, and having heard people talking about, the fact that there are options, that also understanding that every time you think there isn't an option, or that you don't think of the options, you should automatically imply that there are options that you don't know anything about. And so now you can start sort of the legwork, so to speak.
I love that. Understanding that you may not know everything. That's a good thing to start with. I love that. Chad, what are you thinking?
I think it's the same thing as like the strategy thing we're talking about. Like, for me, it's being introspective and knowing where I need to push through and knowing when I need to pause. For instance, like my new floor, I'll call it, right? Like, even if I'm having a bad day, it's eating right and it's going to the gym. I might not give 100% at the gym, but I'm still putting the reps because I have to, because that's the new floor. But then also realizing, okay, next week you got to pick it up a little bit harder, and you've got to push further on that squat, that lunge, that bench press, whatever that looks like, to get to that next level. So I think depending upon where you're at and what that moment is, and again, what you're trying to push through versus what you're trying to step back on, is where you need to have that introspective of like, okay, now is this worth pushing through? Like, what is it going to hurt? What am I going to gain, or what am I going to lose in this process? So always analyzing for me is trying to figure out, like, where do I push through, or where do I step back? And a lot of it, like I said, recently for OS was really stepping back and really trying to figure out, what's our main goal? What's our main mission? And then going ahead and diverting based off of that, and reconfiguring certain things on the backside of stuff.
Seeking clarity. I love that. Sean, what are you thinking?
Well, I've got an example. And so first I'll propose this, and I'm not locked into this, but I'm going to propose that there is no right or wrong time. There's only time. So with that in place, I'm going to sweep it off to the side, and then I'm going to say, we all know that there's a right time for certain things, and there's a wrong time for certain things. We know that. But now I'm going to go back to my first statement. I'm going to pull it in from the left flank, and I'm going to say it again. Maybe there is no right time, and maybe there is no wrong time. There is only time. So now I'm going to get to my main point. My nearly 4-year project of trying to choose a camera system, which I'm currently involved in right now. Nearly 4 years ago, I thought, I want to get a good camera system. I want to capture things the way I want to capture it, the way my eye sees the world. I want to have still photography. I want to have video. I want to be creative. I want to do certain things with a camera system. And then nearly 4 years ago, I'd identified what that system was. But then I just kept churning away on this project of, is it the right decision? Is it the wrong? Is it the right time? Is it the wrong time? Now I'm nearly 4 years later, and here's what's occurred. Nearly every day, or every night more correctly, I'm watching a video or 3 on YouTube about various camera systems. Canon, Sony, Panasonic, Olympus, you name it, I've seen it. I've done all the research. I've had all the thoughts. And I still haven't made a final decision yet. What has happened is I've become enamored with the process of hunting for a camera system without actually pulling the trigger on a camera system. My new hobby is the hobby of watching videos about cameras. So to my point, where's the harm in that? I don't have a new camera system, of course, but I've really enjoyed the process of the hunt of life, we'll call it, where I've been engaged in a process that I'm learning, I'm enthusiastic, I have some passion for, I appreciate the field, the body of work of cameras. And so I've learned a lot over the last 4 years. If I would have thought 4 years ago that the right moment is 4 years ago to buy what I was going to buy, I might have the wrong system, or not. If I was to buy today, I'd have a more educated purchase, but that doesn't mean that today's purchase is the right purchase for 10 years from now. Another interesting point on this 4-year project, we'll call it, is that all along the way, my frustration of not being able to capture what I want to capture has caused me to try to capture what I want to capture with my only tool, which is this, my camera, my phone. And so I've tried to push my own personal creative envelope with a substandard tool to get what I want to get. And it's taught me a lot. It's taught me to create better images and video with the tool that I thought was substandard. So then it comes down to wants and needs. Did I need a camera system? No. Did I want a camera system? Yes. Do I need a camera system today? No. Do I want one today? Yes. But every right and wrong moment to make those decisions, if I don't choose, as long as I stay in the game of being passionate about the hunt, then does it matter? Now, I know what Nick was talking about in respect to if in these critical real-time moments where it's milliseconds of right choice, wrong choice, where there's consequences in lives and damage, well, that's really important. But I think that construct that Nick described is the same as a camera construct. You do your best in the moment. You understand why you're there. You understand the process that you're in. You understand what it's all about, and you manage it as best as you can. So maybe there is no right or wrong decision in every single second. There's only time. There's only decisions. And you've got to get right with each moment and each time.
I got nothing to add on that one. That's fantastic. You guys have just awesome answers to this, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on perhaps something a little bit more off the side now. Is that you guys are all coaches, advocates, mentors. People look to you for answers, and I'm wondering, perhaps, what indicators do you look for in the people around you that perhaps they need to either refocus or step back or lean in? Like, what are you looking for in other people to see whether they're not in balance, whether they're not on mission, whether they're off task? What is it, some of the indicators for you that make you want to talk to them and say, hey, maybe you should switch things up a little bit? Chad, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
I think it's consistency, right? I mean, I see Sean, he's out there kicking sticks or riding his mountain bike, right? And it's something he films and does all the time. Nick, like he's lifting and doing all kinds of crazy crap and skateboarding. And it's like, okay, consistency. He's constantly doing that. Seb, he's out there and hiking and he's back on the mats, and Chance, same thing. So I think it's consistency and looking at those individuals of, they say what they are going to do and they do it, right? And there's a feel of they're always going to be there and they're always going to level up. So I always look for that consistency on that basis of where I'm going with and who I want to follow and who I'm going to take information from.
I love that. Consistency is key. To a point, though, I think, and I'm going to challenge you on this one here. Do you think that consistency could be cover? Do you think people could be using that consistency to kind of wash over some of the issues that they're dealing with? And I'm going to come right back to you, Chad. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think you can drown yourself out in doing too much of, let's say mountain biking, right? To avoid something else like washing windows or vacuuming, right? So I think that could be a hindrance as well. But I think, all you gentlemen on here hold a very strong balance of, that work-life balance and hobbies and everything else. And so when I look at that, for me, it's just understanding that individual at a different level completely.
I love that. Personal touches to it. Nick, what are you thinking?
Yeah, whenever this comes up with people I'm talking to, I ask them what they want to do, like what their goal is and why, and just keep refining that why. Because a lot of times people will have a goal and they'll be like, yeah, I've thought about this. This is what I want to do. I'm like, okay, like what makes you want to do that? What's the thing that drives you to do that? And oftentimes it takes a while to get to the core of that thing. And I just keep refining that process, asking that question over and over again, and trying to figure out what the intrinsic or extrinsic motivators are. And as you kind of strip those things away and get to the core of it, it's generally a simple thing, right? Like they want to make a lot of money. Okay, why? Well, I want to provide for my family. Okay, that's awesome. But like, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? Like, describe what that actually is to me and why you want to do these things. Like, what does it mean to provide for your family? Oh, well, it means that we never have to worry about money. Okay, like what does that look like? What is that limit of never having to worry about money? Does that mean as far as eating goes, or as far as sleeping in a nice house, as far as having AC? Like, tell me the why. And then once you get to that core of the problem and you figure out like what that actual driver is behind the thing that they're trying to do, well, then you can be like, okay, now we know that like all these things you're doing over here, like none of that matters. None of that actually pushes you towards that goal. So maybe we can take a step back from that. And maybe we could put all that time and effort that you were doing in this thing over here into maybe more meditation, more journaling, maybe going to the gym or whatever it may be, right? But I find that a lot of time people, to what you're saying, Seb, are running fast to like somewhere they don't exactly understand where they're going or the reason why they're even going in that direction. So I always try and ask them, like, if you like, I need you to tell me exactly what you want to do, why you want to do it, and what that actually looks like to you. And then from that point on, then we can actually start going somewhere and actually building a plan and figuring out what we're trying to do to get to that desired end state.
Stripping to the foundation and hitting it from the beginning. I like it. Seb, you want to build on that?
Sure. Yeah, it's, do you even have a path? Are you on a beaten path, on a path that you shouldn't be on? Are you off the cliff altogether? For me, it's a question of if what you're doing currently is working for you in light of what it is that your end goal is. You don't need me. That's and I say this respectfully. Obviously, we can always benefit from each other and all this stuff, but we're talking from a coaching perspective here, or from a conversation perspective, or mentoring perspective. I generally just don't jump on mentoring somebody that hasn't come to me and said, hey, here's where I am and some of the challenges I have, and then I will obviously help problem solve that based on their circumstances and my experience ultimately. But I do believe that if you have your why, and if you're purpose driven, and it's anchored in valid stuff, because again, this is the conversation I love to have. Or I have a purpose. What is it? This, as Nick just alluded to. Okay, cool. Put it under fire. Pressure test it, see what happens. And everybody had full of good intentions to be in green and black and whatever when they went to selection. But how many people, once the selection hits and it's hour number 4 of day 1 and you got 20 hours left to go on that day, your why and your purpose can really sort of jump in an F1 and at a high rate of speed, evaporate from your thoughts. And so I think that the point that Nick made about really the depth of the why and the purpose is a critical piece. Now, once the person has that, and if the person believes they have that, and if I believe that too, and they get lost along the way because somehow they didn't realize that, listen, the path isn't going to be fully lit up here. You're going to have to sometimes, shoot a general bearing in a general direction and course correct later if need be. But the fact is that path isn't always lit up. In fact, it hardly ever is until you're looking at it backwards. Now, when you look at it backwards, now everything is lit up and it makes sense. You should have seen it coming. But that's just not generally the case. And so for me, those are the two things that I really look for. Are you where you want to be? And if you know exactly where you want to be and you don't know how to, that is the conversation that will be the conversation starter.
I'm loving this. Sean, what do you got?
If I'm involved with someone, and if your question is in respect to either a mentor or a coach as the example, well, I'm looking for the pattern. I want to understand their pattern of life, their pattern of thought, their pattern of operation, how they do things. And I want to see if that pattern is consistent or inconsistent with who they are right now and who they want to be. If it's inconsistent, then we'll have to talk about it. If it's consistent, I'll observe it for longer to really concretize their pattern. And so the more I can concretize it, the more I can nuance it. And I'm saying, like, I can do this and I can do that. I'm simply speaking from a mentorship perspective of having a conversation. I'm obviously not moving them like a puppet boy. And so that's for them to do the work. We're just having the conversation. And so to mentor someone, I need to understand their pattern. If it's consistent, it's easier to get to work. If it's inconsistent, it's more difficult to get to work. So let me give you an example. If someone approaches me and they're all over the ice, they're running around at warp factor 3 in no direction. That is not a pattern other than you're out of control. And so if it's the out of control pattern, now what I'm actually thinking about is time and energy. So we have our lifetime. So the time that we put our life into something minute by minute. And we have our life energy, which is not the same as time. If you want to put all of yourself, pour yourself entirely into a moment, and the time that you're doing that, you're actually fully aware of the entire minute. Now you're matching your life energy into time. But it's rare that those two things are 100%. Time can disappear like that if you're not paying attention, as can life energy. So you can pay attention to the moment, but put no energy into it, and you're going to get a different outcome than if you don't pay attention to the moment, but you throw all your life energy into it. Now you're running around like a fool. And so you got to understand time and life energy. And so if it's consistent, it's easy to understand. If it's inconsistent, it's hard to patternize. So for me, again, as a coach or a mentor, I want to understand their pattern or non-pattern so that we can talk about that.
So to further this question then, what role do you think the addition of external help comes in terms of meditation, in terms of mental health support, in terms of treatments of any kind, psychedelics, or any other ways, going to a men's retreat or whatever? What role does that external assistance play in approaching how we take time? Sean, I'm going to come right back to you. What do you think?
Sure. My very first thought is this, Chance, that I think you're providing two things to yourself at that moment, not one thing. If you decide to invest your time and life energy into going to a men's retreat this weekend, you're not only investing in improving yourself, you're investing in improving the group, but you're also feeling that you're doing something about doing something. You know that you're focused on improving yourself. It is less perhaps about the physiological benefits, the emotional benefits that you'll get out of that weekend retreat. Maybe there's 10 burpees on Saturday, maybe there's 10 burpees on Sunday. That's the physiological taken care of. Maybe everyone sits around and talks and it's heartfelt and supportive. And so that's the emotional aspect taken care of. But the psychological piece is in that group moment, but also before you drive to the moment, you full well knowing that you're doing something for you, that you're focused on being a better person in the immediate future. That idea, that understanding that you're in the game of getting better builds on itself. All these tiny little moments that you commit to know that at the end of that, you're going to be a better person. The very belief that you're believing in yourself is pretty freaking powerful, man. So I feel that these kind of things are often viewed through the weekend, whereas I'm suggesting that you view yourself before the weekend. And if you're paying attention, you'll be reaping the benefits of it before you even arrive at the men's support group.
Interesting. Look at this. I'm loving this. Seb, what are you thinking?
Yeah, man. So for me, when I look at something like this, it generally has to do with technical know-how. If there is an area that you are lacking, and there's various modalities that need to be engaged for wellness to be wellness, and we all know that. And there's several pillars, and out of those pillars, there's a gazillion things that can help you. And you can't possibly optimize your wellness if you don't have the technical know-how on dealing with some of those modalities. And so there is a learning piece and this is the beauty of it, is once you understand that, once you learn something, it's not going anywhere. Now it's a tool in the toolbox and it's yours. And now you can start focusing on other things. What other tools, what other strategies can I employ? What other things can I do to optimize myself as a human being in this journey of life? And so, I think the risk, obviously, with that is to be grasping at straws or at absolutely anybody that comes by with something that sort of makes sense, and for you to be jumping into this with a lot of vigor and not a lot of research. And obviously those are traps that you can fall into, especially if you're at a point in time in your life where you can't trust your own judgment. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens with people. And it once you reach a certain point where you feel as though you can't trust your own judgment, then what is trustworthy in the decisions that you are making? And so I think it's just important to understand that it's impossible for us to have any sort of meaningful engagement at any level whatsoever and mess it up and not be plastered all over social media, not be plastered all over. So if you are seeking, or if you are understanding that you need to be investing in some of those modalities where you need some technical skills, then you need to spend the time doing the work, which is, which one of those am I going to engage in? And so none of this becomes an external pursuit. It's all an internal pursuit with an external component. But as long as you know that you're engaged in a process, to Sean's point 2 minutes ago, now you start tallying micro wins in relation to the goal that you set forth for yourself. Whether or not it takes you 6 months to figure out what technical route you're going to take, it really doesn't matter, because you've been putting in the work. You've been researching, you've been doing the camera thing, without the camera and without the prospect of a camera, but you've been putting in the work, and the work that you put into yourself is never wasted, provided that it goes towards the direction of travel, or at least the direction where the goal is. Because if you're obviously going the wrong way, you want to be turning around. But I think, again, and I'll make this analogy, I made it a million times and I apologize for this, but it's still very valid. How long does it take to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu? I don't know, but it takes you one day to be better than yesterday. And we need to stop worrying about, what the over there is happening and how long it's going to take to get there. You're taking active steps right now, and you're taking incremental steps towards wellness, towards knowledge, towards experience and development. And that in itself is enough to take a massive toll off your central nervous system and make you more poised in the moment as well. So it's a double win.
Bam. I love that. Time spent on yourself is never wasted. I love that. Nick, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would almost counter that to an extent, right? I think all these things like mindfulness, mental health, and all these other different treatments, they're amazing. And I partake in them myself. And I think they provide clarity, right? It helps having someone else tell you something that you may already know inside, to actually remove that fog. So you're like, oh, I knew that. That's the thing I got to do. It also provides perspective and inspiration, right? Seeing these other dudes or all these other people doing the thing, or helping get a different idea of like, oh, that we're struggling the same thing, or we're working towards the same goal. They're just going about it differently than I am. Let me see the approaches they are, and to Seb's point, seeing the technical skills behind it all. But I think after a point, it just becomes mental masturbation. People fall in love with doing the thing, or saying that like, hey, I'm doing all this stuff to get to where I need to go. I'm reading all these productivity books. I'm going to all these retreats. I'm doing all this meditation. But at some point, you have to stop, or I don't want to say stop, but you have to realize that like you're not actually doing the work, right? I see this a lot in the psychedelic therapy space, where people do all this meditation and energy work, and they'll do psychedelic things, and they'll go do this or that, and they're like, for ayahuasca, you'll see it a lot in this hippy dippy area, where they'll be like, oh, how many ceremonies have you done? Well, it doesn't really matter how many ceremonies I've done. It really matters is if I have done a ceremony, and then have I done anything after that to actually do the work, to actually progress this thing that I'm trying to do? Have I actually put the lessons I've learned into action? And I think these things are all amazing, but at some point, I think you, like when they say like you're never losing when you're investing in yourself, like at some point you are. And at some point, like you can read all the books and do all of the things, but if you never actually pressure test it and put that rubber to the road to figure out what works for you, when it actually will push you forward, you're just losing money and you're losing time trying to figure these things out.
But I've done 17 ayahuasca retreats. I'm obviously more enlightened than you are. Come on. Great point, though. Chad, what are you thinking?
No, I definitely piggyback on what Nick said there. And it's kind of why I say Mental Joe tries to hold that very neutral space, right? Because there is a lot of woo-woo, and there is a lot of, I've done the 17 ayahuasca retreats and I know all, but it's like, well, you're not putting in the work. What did I show you? You got some visions, you got some know-how, but you're not putting in the work. And so for the mindfulness stuff, I think, again, it comes to knowing where you're at and what balances and what you're willing to take on. I'm still not a great journalist, but in my mind, I will go through and I'm journaling in my head and putting the check boxes there and putting it on the whiteboard. It might not be a spiral notebook or a cool leather back that I'm putting this stuff in, but I'm journaling in a way that holds me accountable. So I think a lot of it's like, oh, if I don't sit on a meditation cushion for 10 minutes in silence, I'm not meditating. Well, no, your meditation could be the gym and you thinking through processes while you're lifting weights. So I think different mindfulness approaches can be different for a lot of people. I personally, I'm not a fan of sitting there and just woos on for 10 minutes. I like to be active and have that going through the mindfulness and understanding where I need to go and where I need to pivot. So I think there can be a lot of jargon in here, but you really got to find out what really works for you. That's going to allow you to put in the reps down the road.
I love that this is kind of a double-sided coin, because you're absolutely right, Nick, in the fact that there are a lot of people out there that will use it as a checklist. Their own mental health and their own support things will be a checklist. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. I'm not better yet. But on the other side of it, there's also still a stigma around, taking time, around meditating, around doing these things for yourself, or sometimes it can be looked at as selfish in terms of, because you have to sacrifice some things for your own good. But I'm wondering, how do you guys challenge that stigma? How do you challenge the perception? And then this is an add-on question to it, but what's the value of rest that people often overlook? Like when you're talking with people that are still in that stigma, what is it that they're missing out of it? Seb, I'm going to come to you. I saw your head nod, and I was like, yeah, he's got it.
Yeah, I do. It's first of all, I think one of the, and we're hitting on one of the anchors that I always get a hard on for, which is external validation, and how fleeting it is and how misleading it is and all of those things. And I think that, if you invest in external, in a prospect of external validation, if you invested half as much of your energy in doing things for yourself and doing things that are right, without necessarily worrying about what the quote unquote social media backlash or whatever that might be, a spouse or a family member or whatever the case may be, I think that you would be less concerned with others' perception of you and you perception of yourself. And is this in line? Am I living a life that's in line with what it is that I either project or want for myself? And those two things, those are the questions that you need to be answering. If you're thinking about how am I going to control other people's perception, and okay, so I'm going to suppose, sort of hypothesis here. Imagine that you somehow figure out exactly what you need so that the perception of other is in line with what you are trying to project, which will never happen. But say you achieve that, now what? It's going to be something else and something else and something else. It never stops. It's a gift that keeps on giving, so to speak. And it's not really a gift after all at all. And so, I think that I see stigma the same way I see vulnerability. When guys call me or send me a message that are like, I can't believe like how vulnerable you are on your post. It always makes me laugh. Like, dude, what are you trying to portray? Like, you're trying to portray something that isn't. And that's why you're threatened every time that you say something that makes you look like you're not exactly what you are portraying. And so now you're setting up, a standard that's arguably or non-arguably based or fundamentally based on deception. You're not the person that you are projecting. And now it flares up insecurities every time that you're going through a struggle, because you definitely want to overcompensate to make sure that nobody knows. And especially if somebody does share, now it makes you uncomfortable because it's essentially an exposition of your shortcoming, right? But I'll give them that, you know where you want to go, what you are doing, and you're investing the time into making these things happen. You are the validation that you need. And once you are the validation that you need, and you are not relying on other people's perception, you're going to stop trying to control their perception. Once you definitely are the person that you say you are, or that you want to be, because you've put in the work and your skills and your knowledge and abilities are based upon real things, you're not going to be threatened every time somebody walks in the room. You're not going to be threatened every time you feel a certain amount of vulnerability, so to speak, or you're not going to be threatened. You're just going to be you doing life.
Love it. Nick, got anything to add?
Yeah, I kind of hit it very similar to what Seb says. It's like whenever people challenge that, the idea of like, oh, I don't need to sleep, or I don't need to take time, or like, I don't need to rest. I'll be like, I kind of look at it as fear, like they're scared of something. And I ask them like, I see it as a sign of cowardice, right? And in the idea of like a lot of the people I try and surround myself with, either now currently in life or from my past career, so we're a bunch of like hardos, right? Run to the sound of gunfire, do the whole thing, yada 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 yada, always getting after it. And then I'm like, well, if you're not willing to take time to rest, like, what are you scared of? Like, that means you're actively running from something you're scared of, and that in itself is an act of cowardice, not to confront the thing. And with a lot of the people that we talk to or that I deal with as far as this question goes, they're smart and intelligent people. So trying to tell them the science of it all is almost lost on them. They know the science. They've read the books. They've seen the podcasts, right? They know how good it is for the nervous system. They know how good it is for all the other things. So I always challenge, like it's a sign of cowardice, man. It's like you are scared of the thing that will happen in these moments of rest. You're scared of taking the foot off the pedal for whatever reason. And, it takes time to figure out what that reason is. But I always challenge them, like, dude, if you're really the hardo that you think you are, then you should be able to take that moment to rest, take that tactical pause. I mean, you'll see it in fighters or you'll see it in martial arts all the time, is the guy who's willing to take that second back and take that tactical pause and like figure out what's going on and take that rest, especially when you're grappling. Like, that's probably the person who knows what they're doing. They know how to win because they know what's going on around them. But the person who's always coming at you 100%, like spider monkey, like they're scared. They're scared of being moved on, and they're just going to come at you like crazy, and they're going to give everything they got, and they're probably going to lose. Right. And I think that's because they're scared of facing the things in their technique that they're not good at. And again, I think that's a sign of cowardice. So whenever my friends or people I talked about this thing, I just ask them, like, dude, what are you scared of? And if you think you're a hardo and you want to say you are, like, you need to actively go against these things, and not actively fighting against these things and dealing with it is a sign of cowardice. And therefore, like, you're not as hard as you think you are.
Bam. I want to see their face. I want to see anytime you say that to somebody. And it actually reminded me of, white belts in jiu-jitsu when you first start, everybody's super tense and nobody's moving, and it's always level 9,000 death matches. And like, there's no relaxation. There's no thought process. It's all just panic. And it's such a great point. Chad, what are you thinking?
I don't know if I've got much to add. I think Seb and Nick really kind of hit it on the head there, and I don't want to muddy the water. So I'm going to go ahead and pass, because I'm sure Sean's got something to chew on that he can give us, but I don't need to add much.
Bam. I love it. Well, pot stirrer, what do you got?
I'll try not to stir it too much, but I do have a thought. I'm definitely going to agree with the boys for sure on this one. And I'll add a little contingent to it. Because, as you said, Chance, BJJers do this and BJJers do that. Well, if you're trying to explain how BJJ works, it takes the right guy at the right time saying the right thing. And if you're the white belt trying to explain how BJJ works, you're the wrong person. And so Nick can say to someone, bro, why are you being such a hardo? Why ... you just like ... Like, from Nick at the right person at the right time, they'll listen. But they wouldn't listen to, Nick's neighbor if Nick hasn't been in the game. And so it takes the right person saying the right thing at the right time to move the needle. Not everyone can jump in on the conversation as a day oneer and try to move the needle for the day 1000er. That's just the way it is. And so don't freely hand out your gong show advice if you've never stood on a mat. So you got to know who you are and what you bring to the table before you start throwing out your rando advice to the hardos. So that's my first thought. My second thought is that know what you're trying to do in the moment with your time, as the example. We've all got it to spend it. We all get to choose what amount of energy we put into that moment of time. If you're really synchronized, you'll understand that that moment requires 100% of my life energy in this moment, whereas that moment requires 60% of my life energy in the moment. And why even think of percentages like that, 100% versus 60%? Because in a 24-hour cycle, you don't have 1 bajillion units of life energy. You might only have 100. You might only have 200. Depends on who you are. So spending your life energy units throughout the day, that's for you to figure out. And some days you've got less units than other days. How you slept, how you drank, how you hydrated, how you ate. All of these various things adjust our life energy in the day. If you're running a really strong program, a really robust, squared away life energy program, even year to year, it'll change. No matter who you are, no matter how squared away you are, life energy will change. But it's for you to understand that it's not just time that you're spending. You're also spending life energy in that time. If you know nothing about either of those two subjects, well, life just slips away. It all is in the rearview mirror. And you might look back 10 years ago when you weren't paying attention and through reflection, learn how to do it better in the future. But those 10 years are gone, man. Like they're gone. You'll never, ever get them back. And so that should really pique your interest as to how much you want to invest in yourself in the future. If you understand that life matters, every minute matters, then you'll invest in your future by paying attention in the moment. Because if you don't do it now, 10 years from now, you'll look back 10 years ago and realize you did nothing with your life. It plays off of what Seb said. When you're talking about a BJJ black belt, you can think that you could have been a black belt, or you can start becoming a black belt. That is life, man. How fast you get to that belt is how much life energy you put into that time. It's a simple equation that plays off against each other, but you got to understand that that is the equation of life.
This is a great point, and I'm currently in a depressive episode right now, and what I have to give is different than what I have to give when I'm not in a depressive episode. And I think the thing that I've come to learn and what I've been able to utilize now is understanding that if I only have 20% today, if I only have that much, then I'm going to give all that 20% doing the things that are important to me. But I'm not going to try to overclock myself into like a 60 or 70%, because then it's going to affect everything else later downstream and it's going to be worse. So to this point, and like I'm giving everything I have right now for this show, and I'm probably going to need to take a break after the show is over in order to refresh and recharge, so that when my kids come home, I can give them everything I have in those moments as well. So I think it's a fantastic point. Now we are coming up on 2 hours right now, and I cannot thank you guys enough for this convo. There's been so many mic drops here. I've been having a hard time figuring out exactly how to respond and get people into the next conversation, next question. So thank you guys. This has been awesome. Nick, Seb, Chad, Sean, thank you guys. It's been awesome. Now, any final thoughts? Anything still bubbling in the back of your brains on taking time on anything that we've gone over so far? Chad, you're on top. I'm gonna hit you first. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, just to your point that you made there, right? It's taking you everything you can to push through, to give your 20% and your all to this. But again, it comes back to that internal awareness, right? Like, hey, I don't have the full boat today, but what I do have is that 20%. I'm going to plug it in. So I think, again, coming back and knowing where your awareness is and where you're at in that time, being and giving that time that needs to happen, it all comes back to you and where you need to recharge and how you need to reset that button. So, I mean, it's conversations like this of where do you push and where do you step back to take that time?
Love it. Seb, any final thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When it comes to managing expectation, just think of it this way, like you've been on the mats for 2 hours and somebody shows up and they took 2 rounds off before asking you for a roll. The propensity is to step away from that role because it isn't going to be the outcome that I so desire, which is generally winning, but you can definitely control your expectations, and you could switch this to survival and be like, what is jiu-jitsu all about to begin with? And is there is there value in me engaging in this here, knowing the state of affairs that I'm in, and really cementing my goal as, surviving this role, or being very defensive, or using the least amount of energy as possible. And in those roles, you oftentimes, they're not great for your ego, but your ego is probably not great for you anyways. So I just love understanding that if I manage my expectations, now I can engage in this role without like all this fear that comes with being dominated, or whatever the case is. You don't, again, if your skills are based on real things, you don't have to worry a whole lot about that. Now, one thing I will caution about is shifting priorities. So when you are task prioritizing, or when you are making some decisions, some people have mastered the art of shifting focus all the time. And so it shifts, but nothing ever gets done. So you're busy, I will give you that, and you're jumping from one thing to another at all times, but you're actually accomplishing nothing. You're doing nothing. You're seeing nothing to completion. And so it's important, when you're task prioritizing, to understand when you are trying to sidetrack yourself by prioritizing another task that seemingly is more important. Is it, or am I just making this up so I can avoid or procrastinate on the task that I need to be doing? If we spoke about that earlier, but having that realization that your own consciousness will shift priorities on you, and it will make it very believable. And so you need to understand when you are doing that to sidestep a problem, and when you are doing that because it is required and you need to reallocate your attention somewhere else.
Beautiful point. Nick, what do you got?
Yeah, like I'll take it in a little more of a macro approach on the idea of how to manage time, and if you feel lost with what you're doing with your time, I can't stress the importance enough of organizing and preparing, right? Like, if you don't know what you should be doing, or what you're doing with yourself, your life energy, your time, what have you, it's probably because you're unorganized, and there's a million things floating around. So it takes time to get organized, figure out, get your ducks in a row, and figure out what you're supposed to do. And then from there, like, once you know what you're supposed to be doing, spend the time to prepare for those things, so that when you actually do take the time to do those things, you're exactly where you need to be, and you're able to be in the right mindset to do those said things that you spent the time organizing for. Like, a good analogy is, like, if you don't know what you should be doing today, that's the most important thing you should be doing today, is figuring that out, right? So, like, I like the idea of the big three. What big three things can I do today to push the needle forward? And if I don't know what those three things are, then that's the most important thing I need to be doing today, is sitting down and figuring out and organizing, okay, what are my priorities for today? What are the three things I'm going to put my time into? And then once I figure that out, then I start preparing for those things, and then I get to go execute those things. And I think that's a very valuable thing, at least in my life, that I've used to help manage my time and figure out what I'm going to actually do with my time.
Love it. Sean, what do you got?
I'm going to try to do it through an example. And my example hopefully will illustrate 2 points. So I've been roasting coffee a long time. When I roast coffee nowadays, I throw on my Sonys. And if I'm listening to some music, or I'm listening to a podcast, or whatever I'm doing, if I'm listening to nothing other than I've got active noise control on, in the time that I'm wearing those and roasting, I don't want to be bothered by anyone. And I try to explain that to my family, like, I'm roasting. And they know I'm roasting, but, things have to happen. People have questions. People want to talk. People want to know where the lucky rabbit's foot is. People want to get involved in your life when you're roasting. And I'm okay with that. But I don't want to be bothered, because I want to focus on roasting. So it's my job to help everyone around me understand that what I'm doing is the thing that I want to do, need to do, have to do, and please let me do it. So be clear. Almost set boundaries to some degree. Not hard and fast boundaries where for the next 7 hours I don't exist, but try to help everyone understand around you that what you're doing is important to you, and you need to focus on your thing. You. Now, the second piece is, when I'm doing that, and again, I've said that I've been roasting a long time. When I first started, that's what I wanted to do, was just roast and not be bothered, so that I could understand my art. not just my job, not just creating green beans into brown beans. I had passion for what I was doing. Therefore, I wanted to be an artist doing it. So my job is to try to become artistic in everything that I do. Do it to a deep enough level that I feel like I have some artistry. Much like Miyamoto Musashi, as I've talked about in the past, at one point, he was just swinging a sword. Then at another point, he was an artist with the sword. And then at another point, he turned into a literal artist. That's what I'm pursuing in everything. It doesn't mean that I am an artist. It means that I have an idea in my mind that I want to live an artistic life. And that requires me to be in the moment, value my time, value my life energy, not be so dogmatic that no one can talk to me, but set some boundaries so that there's less talk at me or less talk with me, so that again, I can focus on my artistic way of life. And everyone's got to find their balance with themselves and with everyone around them to accomplish that. So to Nick's point, joining some banking organization, soulless, nameless, faceless, opportunity to make money, that isn't the artist's way. That isn't a thoughtful way. That's just a way. But there's no passion in that. There's no soul in that. And so whatever you're doing in life, if you don't feel the passion or the soulfulness of the moment, choose something else. Find a thing that speaks to you internally, and then set boundaries. Try to dive down that artistic rabbit hole and become all that you can be.
Beautiful. And I think I don't really have anything to add, but I will. I'm going to steal something you said earlier, Sean, from the quote, which is, "If we never take time, how can we ever have time?" And I just wanted to reiterate that, because it's not just a thought about it. It's not just a plan for it. It's not just anything. It is actively taking the time and utilizing it. And yeah, that's all I got. Thanks everybody for the convo. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you all next week. Chimo.